here for this very special seminar that we have today. And, I'm not going to take a lot of time to introduce you to Beth Lopes, but if you've been coming to Swan ever since our very first season in 2012, you've seen shows directed by Beth. And, there basically have been pretty much two directors at New Swan, and that's been Beth and myself. And so, when I need a director, this is my turn to. And I know the show is going to be fantastic and just very carefully mapped, thoughtfully edited, which is not easy with these plays. Beth is really pretty masterful at that. And everybody that works at Swan enjoys working with Beth as a director. So for me, as an artistic director, success is about really surrounding yourselves with the most creative and imaginative and intelligent people you can. And these are all adjectives that would describe Beth. Now, for this production, I sort of decided early on that I was going to direct the other play, and I felt, I didn't really want to tackle this one, and Beth maybe didn't exactly know that she wanted to do it either, but she took it on. And I will say that we had a lot of conversations about the play because it is as you all know, and as she will talk about, it's a difficult script. What's often categorized as a problem play, which means it doesn't easily fit into a particular category, although it's generally categorized as a comedy. So I'm not going to give away too much because Beth's going to talk to you a lot about her process, but I know that what you wound up seeing was something that evolved, and it didn't just evolve quickly. It wasn't a quick transformation. It was a steady move toward the decisions that were made that had to do with a lot of, obviously, studying the script and reading the script, but then also working with the actors. Because early on, Beth said to me, I don't know exactly how we're going to end this thing. I said, oh.
Some of you saw it.
Oh. I said, okay, all right, that's kind of exciting. And she said, but we'll see. And I really do think it's fair to say that a lot of the decisions that were made happened in rehearsal with the actors that you had worked on the play with you. So without further ado, our esteemed director of Measure for Measure and New Swan Associate Artistic Director, Beth Lopes.
I'm so grateful that all of you showed up today to talk about this play. And adaptation in Shakespeare was how the lecture was promoted. But because we're talking about this specific play, I've sort of titled my presentation something slightly different, which is Breaking Point, Rage in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, which I think pretty much sums up our adaptation of Measure for Measure. So first, who am I? As Eli said, I'm a founding member of New Swan Shakespeare Festival. All seasons but one, I think, that I've been here, starting with Comedy Bearers. I am a freelance director of Shakespeare. I've directed around 24 fully realized productions and countless other adaptations, workshops, readings, lectures. I'm also an educator. Do we want to do lights down?
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't cue you.
I'm really bad at lights.
No, I was supposed to cue you and I didn't. Just so that you guys can see the graphics. We'll go back and forth. We'll go back and forth. I have a little bit of horrible fluorescent front lighting.
Is that good?
Yeah. Great. So I'm an educator of acting, directing, and editing Shakespeare. I've taught some at UCI, other institutions as well. I'm also the adapter of Cyprus. I add this just if any of you saw this reading that we did at the end of last season. I adapted Othello into an adaptation that was just around the central 4 characters in Othello. So that was our last offering of the season. And most importantly for today, I'm the director of New Swan's 2024 production of Measure for Measure. I'm curious, how many of you saw the production?
All right.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Yay.
How many of you from the production or before are familiar with the play, Measure for Measure? Right? How many of you have not seen or read Measure for Measure? Anyone? Great, awesome. Thank you for being up front because I will do a little bit more exposition. Thank you. Thank you. Great. So a little bit about today, what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of the origin story of this lecture, which is the Kirk Davis lecture, which unfortunately Kirk couldn't be here tonight. We miss him so much. Kirk is a wonderful man and a huge supporter of New Swan. And after seeing our production of Measure for Measure, he wrote me with an email with some questions. It was a very lovely email, and he wanted to engage about his struggle with some of the choices. It was so thought-provoking and lovely, and so I sent him back about a 5-minute voice memo, because it's easier for me to talk, and I sent him back the voice memo, and he wrote back, "This is so interesting, I'm totally convinced, I want you to do the lecture." So that's how the lecture sort of started. So today is a little bit a defense of sorts of the choices that we made in our production. I want to be clear, there was a lot of positive response to the show as well, but I found that the conversations with the people who seemed to be angry or confused to be some of the most stimulating engagement we had on the show. So this presentation is largely built out of those dialogues. The other thing I want to talk about today is the difference between reading these plays and performing them. In performance, choices must be made. In my mind, and we'll talk about this more later, there's no such thing as strictly by the text. And lastly, connecting the plays with the moments they're being performed in. Something that I long believed as an avid Shakespeare fan, the only reason to continue to do these plays is to unearth how do they speak to the moment in which they are being performed, right now. So to talk about our production of Measure, that was summer of 2024 at New Swan, I want to go in a little bit on the production concept. So we're going to start today with where we started in our production, what we called our prologue. So you'll notice when we'll play the clip in a second, similar to many of our plays at New Swan, our production does not begin where the text does. Our first image that you'll see is the character Isabella, and the first thing we hear is her heartbeat. It's a little hard to hear on the recording, but I think we can hear it in the room. This is intended, this heartbeat, from the very beginning to align you, our audience, with Isabella, to see what she sees, to feel what she feels. And what she sees and feels is, all is not well in Vienna. Our prologue shows a city full of dangers, lawless and violent, a world that is inhospitable and treacherous, especially to our female characters, whose well-being and ambitions were not taken into consideration when this world was constructed. And you'll notice that this measure was designed to look all too familiar, not necessarily our present, but possibly a not too distant future. And as Isabella is navigating this hostile environment, we'll see her encounter an everyday plight for women living in cities, and her heart, that we are now tied to, starts to beat and beat and beat until she decides to let her rage break free, even if just for a moment. great. That was how we started the play. So this measure unequivocally centered the female perspective. Isabella is our empathy center, the heart, pun intended, of our production. These heartbeat moments, as we called them, are intended to intensify the points of the story where Isabella is put into impossible situations and force the audience, if they weren't already, to empathize with what she is feeling in these scenes. The heartbeats build into a frenzy until her rage explodes in a moment of action. This sequence is repeated in key moments throughout the play. In addition to starting and ending with Isabella, there were other alterations we made to the original text. Francisca, a nun, features more prominently than in the original, absorbing several male friars into her character. And when I say absorb, I mean that the text was largely retained, but transposed to her character and her point of view. Aeschylus, the Duke's usual second in command, has been translated into a female character in this production, magnifying the narrative of a senior female employee being passed over for promotion on gut feelings. He literally uses the word, I have a feeling, about Angelo. The character of Mariana, Angelo's former spurned fiancé, who doesn't show up until Act 4 in Shakespeare's original as sort of a plot deus ex machina of sorts, and to make her more three-dimensional, as well as to help the audience remember who she is when she really comes into play, we wrote a bit of dialogue introducing her at the very beginning of the play, and later enacted a dumb show where there's no words and people are just acting out, when the Duke is revealing to Isabella the story of the broken engagement. We see the actors playing Mariana and Angelo act that out. And then perhaps the largest shift is the elimination of the character of the male pimp Pompey and absorbing that character into the female bawd Mistress Overdone. Now, for those of you who saw the production, in the original script, Mistress Overdone, I believe, is only in 2 scenes. It's a very small part. And so a large percentage of what you saw of this character was actually originally this male character of Pompey. So through these modifications, we can more deeply explore the small range of choice that exists for women in this world and the different avenues they've taken to ensure their survival. What our production was striving to show is that it's not just one incident or one woman. It's a lifetime of that heartbeat racing, on the street, in classrooms, at places of work, in homes, and at the center of that heartbeat is fear and rage. My first mantra in working on this production was, even the strongest woman has her breaking point. And for the record, these are strong women that Shakespeare has created, and they have their breaking point. The photo that I'm showing right now is from the beginning of our second act, which is the original introduction of Mariana in the original text, where we decided to include the entire chorus of female characters in Mariana's song. That does exist. The song does exist at the beginning of this scene. In the original text, it's a boy that's singing the song to her, and there are different lyrics. And so we adjusted it to her singing the song, later adding the whole chorus of female characters, and we used a song called Curses by the Crane Wives. A little shout out because they were so lovely about us using their song. Our purpose with including these characters at the beginning of the second act was to point out that it's not just Isabella. This place is not built for any of them. They are trying to exist in a world where their hopes, ambitions, desires, and human rights are afterthoughts. The Duke says it in the last scene in the form of a joke, that if you're not a maid, a wife, or a widow, then you're nothing. A woman can't be anything if she's not in relation to a man. So now I want to do a section. Eli, I lost you on the lights.
Oh, sorry.
I want to just like engage a little bit so you can see me. We're going to do a section called Straight from the Text. Isabella's journey. It's just text, so it's not as important to see. And I want to engage. Straight from the text. So many of our choices that I've talked about thus far are considered adaptation, but the origins always come from the text itself. I'm a big stickler in that. I get inspired by the text itself. I'm not about, my go-to is always Macbeth in space. Like, there has to be a reason. And I look forward to someone showing me the reason for Macbeth in space. But, so heading towards our most controversial choice, which I haven't spoken about yet, I wanted to go through Isabella's journey, as it is, straight from the text. And I'm not even going to include any photos, because I don't want you to be swayed by the emotion that comes from seeing a photo. This is straight from the plot, and I'll let you know if we've added stuff along the way, because we do add a little bit, but I'll let you know. So, on the day she has become a nun, Isabella finds out that her brother is going to be executed for committing fornication. She strives to save him using the proper channels by speaking at length with Angelo, a man with an enormous amount of authority who she believes to be honorable and safe with. She is physically assaulted by Angelo and told that he will torture her brother to death if she does not, quote, yield her body to his will and his sharp appetite. He also says repeatedly that no one will believe her if she tells anyone about this. And I'm including that this was one of our heartbeat moments, just so that we can sort of track when these moments were throughout the show. And for you in the back, Angelo only has power because the Duke has left him the power. And the Duke has gone off to Poland, theoretically. We'll talk about what the Duke was actually doing in a second. So Isabella then goes to her brother, seeking comfort and safety, believing he would never ask her to do this. He does ask her to do it. And in our production, he inadvertently interacts with her body in the same way that Angelo did, kneeling to her, grabbing her hand, and pulling her into him, which triggers a stress response from her. Once again, safety is broken. This was another one of our heartbeat moments. So that staging, that physical staging, was something that was specific to our production. But I think the safety being broken is plot-based. So the Duke, who has not gone to Poland, he's actually decided to undercover boss Angelo and dress as a friar, a religious authority. So the Duke, disguised as a friar, swoops in and immediately tells Isabella that he believes her and she has nothing to fear, that he only wants to do her good. Isabella trusts him because she believes him to be a religious authority and finds safety in his presence and his plan towards what she believes is both their goals: saving her brother while keeping her body her own. In an offstage scene that Shakespeare mercifully doesn't make us act out, but it does happen to Isabella regardless in the character's trajectory, she returns to Angelo and must endure his presence while he goes through with her the logistics of the intended rape twice over. She says he went through it twice. He tells her there's a garden, there's a gate, here's a big key, here's a little key. It's ridiculous when you think about actually having to have that conversation. Even though it is the Duke's plan. Oh wait, I haven't described the plan. The plan. So the Duke decides that the plan is to have Mariana swap in, because she was betrothed to Angelo, to swap in the dark for Isabella. That's the big plan, and it's the Duke's plan. And although it's his plan, Isabella is actually the one who talks to Mariana and convinces her to have sex with Angelo in her place. And in our production, in the text it says a servant goes along with Mariana. In our production, we made that servant Isabella, because the actors both felt that she would go with her to try to make sure that she was okay throughout and afterwards. So comforts her after the event. So after all the planning and stress and Mariana's sacrifice, the Duke tells Isabella that her brother is dead anyway, which is not true. Another heartbeat moment. Isabella has an explosive response filled with grief and rage. He tells her that her only comfort is revenge, and she must expose Angelo in public. In our production, she collapses into the Duke's arms when she says the line that's in the script, "I am directed by you." After all this, and with no sleep, Isabella takes to the streets and stands in front of the ruling body, who she doesn't know she knows, right? The Duke is not the friar in her mind. Stands in front of the ruling body and a crowd to tell them about Angelo's assault. No small feat if you put yourself in her shoes. I would be terrified. This is how I approach these plays. What would a human do? What would a human feel? So if you put yourself in those shoes in the street, in public, in front of the ruling body. The Duke initially responds by making her reveal herself to Angelo. He says the line, "Reveal yourself to Angelo." I was thinking it's funny, that unnecessarily cruel, if you ask me, and then publicly insults her, pretends not to believe her, and has her hauled off to prison. This is straight from the text. None of this is adaptation. When she is summoned back, the Duke is gone, but her trusted friar is there, but acting strangely. Finally, he is revealed to actually be the Duke in disguise. Surprise! The last beacon of trust she had ended up being a lie. And her first words to him, after he summons her, of course, is to immediately ask for pardon. She asks for pardon because she is aware that he has all the power and she has none. The Duke then doubles down on the lie about Claudio, confirming in Isabella's mind that her brother is truly dead. Then, the Duke announces that he's going to execute Angelo in revenge of Claudio's death. This is clearly not anything he ever discussed with Mariana, and it puts Isabella into an impossible position, having to defend Angelo at Mariana's entreaty. Mariana asks Isabella to beg for Angelo's life. Another heartbeat moment. And you could argue that she agrees to do so because of the concept of forgiveness. She is on her way to being a nun, right? That I think you could definitely argue that. But as a human woman, from that point of view, I believe it is more likely for Mariana she does this. A woman who saved Isabella from being raped by Angelo. Regardless of the reason, begging for his life probably took an enormous toll on Isabella emotionally. The Duke brusquely rejects their pleas, and then cues the provost to bring out a prisoner. The prisoner that we theoretically think is Barnaby. Another surprise, it's not Barnaby, and it's Claudio. Claudio is actually alive. Considering Isabella was told by the Duke 5 minutes ago that Claudio is dead, our production gives her a few moments of shock when the reveal happens. Besides, the Duke is speaking to Isabella immediately after the reveal. And it is only 2 lines before the Duke is proposing to Isabella. 2 lines. Another heartbeat moment. She doesn't have the time to even process the news that Claudio is alive, or question why the Duke lied to her about it, before he is down on one knee, asking for the very thing she thought they were working together to protect. He proposes publicly and does not look for a response from her. And in our production, he looks right at her when he says, "And what's yours is mine." He says, "What is mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." And she starts to say something. He turns away from her and continues talking. She doesn't speak for the rest of the play, and no one speaks on her behalf. All of that is straight from the text. That's what we're working with from Shakespeare. So for me, there's an inevitable conclusion. If you think about all of this happened, granted the timeline of this play is messy. There's tons of contradictions. We had to do a lot of work to sort of unravel it. Our lovely dramaturg, Nadia, who's going to be by at some point, helped so much with that. But more or less, this happened in 24 hours. All of what we just went through. So if you follow the trajectory of these moments as written from the text, from the point of view of a human woman, rather than that of an archetype, this was our culmination.
The prisoner that I saved, who should have died when Claudio lost his head as like almost to Claudio as himself.
If he be like your brother, for his sake is he pardoned. For your lovely sake, give me your hand and say you will be mine. He's my brother too. But fitter time for that. By this, Lord Angelo perceives he is safe. Methinks I see a quickening in his eye. Well, Angelo, your evil quits you well. Look you, love your wife. Her worth yours. I find an apt remission in myself. And yet here's one in place I cannot pardon. You, Sirrah, you me for a fool? A coward? One of our luxury? An ass? A madman? Wherein have I so deserved of you that you extol me thus?
Faith, my lord, I spoke it but according to the trick. If you must hang me for it, you may. But I had rather it would please you I might be whipped.
Whipped! First, and hanged after. Rather, proclaim it round about the city. If any woman wronged by this lewd fellow, as I have heard himself swear there's one whom he begot with child, let her appear, and he shall marry her. The nuptial finished, thy slanders I forgive, and therewithal rescind my other orders.
Marrying a punk, my lord, is pressing to death, whipping, and hanging.
Slandering a prince deserves it. She, Claudio, whom you wronged, look you restore. Joy to you, Mariana. Love her, Angelo. I have confessed her, and I know her virtue. Thanks, good friend Aeschylus, for thy much goodness. Thanks, Provost, for thy care and secrecy. We shall employ thee in a worthier place. Dear Isabel, I have a proposal much imports your good, wherein, if you'll a willing ear incline, what's mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. So, bring us to our palace, where yet we'll show what's yet behind that's meet you all should know.
Yeah, I think we could do lights back up. Thank you. I want to go back to talking about reading versus performance. So a patron commented that the end of the play, as written, brilliantly ties up the play. That's fair in theory, but what about in performance? If you can find an actor to say the lines without any point of view, without just doing it as written, okay, let's start there. But then, where is Isabella? Is she close to him? Is she far away from him? Is she touching him? Is she not touching him? Is she smiling? Is she crying? What about everybody else? Are they cheering? Are they silent? Do the lights go out? Is it a long, slow fade? Or is it a quick bump? All of those things are choices that you're making to tell us how to feel about what we just saw. So in my opinion, there's no such thing as written. Choices must be made. And granted, that was a big one. I give you that. I give you that. But there is no such thing as written. So to talk about our third thing, a measure for our times, I argue that there's no way to engage with these plays, any play really, divorced from the moment in time we're experiencing them. And that can be on a global or national level, or that could be the day you had heading into the theater. That could be the audience you have. The thing my dad remembers about the glass menagerie he saw on Broadway with Zachary Quinto was the man that got up right as it was ending and went in front of him so he couldn't see it. That's what he remembers. It's all live, it's in the moment. You cannot divorce yourself from how you are feeling in that moment based on the day, the month, the entire life that you personally have led and that have brought you to the theater. So, Shakespeare specifically, do we change Shakespeare, these plays that were written so long ago? So another email exchange that I had with a patron asked why I feel like I have the right, and it actually wasn't as hostile as this sounds, but why I feel like I have the right to change Shakespeare. It was actually a really lovely engagement. There's multiple layers for that for me. Because first, knowing that what we have as Shakespeare's words are largely based on the memory of his actors and then filtered through scholarly edits throughout the years, I feel like I have the right to make some of my own edits. That we don't quite know exactly, we're not sure exactly what the original text was. So an example from our production, that there was a speech that, if any of you remember, it's the speech that basically covers Mariana and Isabella hashing out the details of Isabella telling her the story, and Shakespeare's very clever way of not having to write that scene and us not having to sit through it. But there's this speech that in the original text that the Duke has that kind of doesn't make any sense of what he's talking about and why it's there. When we did some research on it, it seems like it was pulled from another part of the play to solve the very problem I was just discussing. And he was like, oh, we need something, let's take this. So it's like, oh, it actually doesn't really make sense. So we ended up pulling a speech from Richard II that we thought made more sense and put it in that spot. So that was an example of we changed the Shakespeare, but it also felt like it actually fit the moment more. Frankly, I do also think, like that, sometimes we're honoring Shakespeare's original intentions more by altering the text. For instance, words that he used, like master, slave, Ethiop, Christian, Jew, and many others, had very different resonance with his audience than they do with ours. His intent didn't include how we would feel about these words now, because how could it? Therefore, it's our job to adapt the play into a format that contains resonance for an audience living right here and right now. Obviously, we know filmmakers take a lot of liberties when adapting books to movies, and sometimes those liberties ask the question, how does a super old book hit a modern audience? And even with movies that are the same story being remade, I looked this up, I believe A Star is Born has been made 5 times. That same story. But the reason that they're remaking it is that they think the story still resonates with the current time period. But most often, adjustments have to be made to update the story with what we know, feel, and experience now. So Measure for Measure was actually not really on our list of titles we were considering until current events in our country occurred. For me, Present Moments unlocked a play from the past that had long eluded me. I could never connect with Isabella. The religious and chastity element, that's just not how I grew up, it's not how I was raised. I couldn't connect to that being the thing. As like a modern woman with a sister I'm really close to, I'm like, if the choice was having sex with somebody and saving my sibling, I just can't connect with her being like, no, let my brother die. I couldn't connect with that. The play switched for me when it became clear that it's not about sex, it's about choice. And I could connect with her desire for choice. Claudio makes a choice. He has sex with his girlfriend, his fiance essentially, even though he knows it's against the law. He makes that choice. And everyone is asking her to give up her choice in order to fix this. More than our brother is our chastity, is the original line that she has after her monologue where she goes through, what am I going to do after the scene with Angelo? And she decides, she does make a choice. She decides more than our brother is our chastity. To hit this point home in our production, we did change the word chastity, and we said more than our brother is our agency. Our choice is what's more than our brother. So many complaints that I fielded about the end of the play were about Isabella's choice. her choice to sleep with Angelo or not, her choice to save her brother or not, her choice whether to accept the Duke's proposal or not, and her choice whether to kill the Duke or not at the end. So Angelo's fit thy consent, he says, fit thy consent, demand, fit thy consent, gives the illusion of choice to Isabella. But he's banking on the fact that she feels like she doesn't have a choice because her brother's life is on the line. And I'll remind you, he does say, I'll also torture him to death. I won't just kill him, I'll torture him to death. And actually, in the text, she does make a choice. More than our brother is our chastity, our agency. And her choice is not respected by Claudio. The false equivalency. Claudio's argument to Isabella is basically, it isn't so bad what Juliet and I did, so it's not that bad what you do with Angelo. And later the Duke repeatedly says that Angelo is asking the same thing of Isabella that he's charging Claudio with, fornication. Under the eyes of their law, it's the same thing. Under our eyes, we know that it's not. Consensual sex between two adults, especially two adults who love each other, is not the same as coerced rape. At the end, when the Duke proposes, his language is, give me your hand and say you will be mine. And then he continues talking. At the end of the play, he says, Dear Isabel, I have a motion much imports your good, whereto if you'll a willing ear incline, what's mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. And then continues talking. The closest thing he has to a question is, whereto if you'll a willing ear incline, but he never gives her a chance to respond. And in this very scene, he has hauled her off to prison with a word, commanded 2 immediate marriages, and threatened to kill someone for slandering him. To argue that she has a choice to reject his proposal, let alone publicly reject his proposal, is unrealistic. More than our brother is our agency. The whole play, Isabella was striving to maintain autonomy, a goal she thought the Duke was her partner in achieving. Isabella knew, as women in our world right now should know, that her agency was in peril. The choice of our production, especially the final choice, is not a triumphant one. I'll tell y'all, I'm going a little off script here, but I'll tell you, I had several different curtain call songs. And like one of them was like, yeah! And we got there and I was like, this is not what this feels like. It is not a triumphant choice. In her final acts, Isabella gives up everything to keep her body her own. A question I received frequently, does the Duke deserve to die? And my answer is, which feels unfortunately relevant, does anyone deserve to be murdered in the street? No! I don't think the Duke deserves to die. But does Isabella have an understandable trauma response to what her body has been through in the last 24 hours? I think she does. If you ask me, is the Duke the antagonist of this specific production, I would say yes. Nia, our lovely dramaturg that I mentioned, the more that we worked on this play, the more that we felt that to be true. Everything that happens in the play is as a result of a choice that he makes. And his choices range from a lack of empathy to downright cruelty. Ego and pride factor into most of his decisions. And this may surprise you, but I would argue that his intentions are good. I think the Duke's intentions are good. But he assumes that his definition of good is the only definition. And he never asks. One of my favorite quotes from the production, from Julia's colleague, Professor Radhakrishnan, was, there is no measure for measure when the very balance which measures measure is out of measure. I love this quote so much, but when the laws and the people enacting them are flawed, there is no measure for measure when the very balance which measures measure is out of measure. So we created an ending that disturbs. To quote LA theater critic Charles McNulty, happiness can claim only a Pyrrhic victory in Measure for Measure, a Shakespeare problem play that Lopes boldly takes in hand. So for those of you that have to look up the origin of this phrase, like I did, the phrase comes from Pyrrhus, a king who defeated the Romans in 279 BC, but lost many of his troops in the process, i.e. a victory, but at what cost? I thought this was like a tremendous way to sum up our ending in 2 words. A Pyrrhic victory. So, Measure, as Eli said, is a problem play, no doubt. But I want to be clear that this is not a solution ending. I don't think we solved the play. I think that we are further digging into the problem. The end of the play, as written, should be disturbing for anyone with empathy for Isabella. But something that I hold as a personal opinion is I think that we have a bit of an empathy problem in this country and maybe on this planet. And I wanted to make sure that no one was leaving the theater unscathed. So something really interesting happened, and I called it a schism in the audience in the final months. And this happened every single time that I watched it with an audience. That moment that we saw where she runs to him and it looks like she's hugging him, I feel like the audience went into these 2 camps. And there was the camp that was like, oh, okay, I guess they're gonna get married. And then there was the other camp that I noticed, and I talked to was a lot of students that was like, what? What? And there was so much anger and confusion because they felt like this production was not leading us to her in his arms, ready to be his wife. And there was real anger and confusion and betrayal. And I say this because I talked to them and they told me they felt betrayed. They felt betrayed. And then, when that moment happened, when she steps back and he staggered and we see the knife, those 2 camps went, and the people that initially were like, all right, were angry. Were angry and confused because what they thought was a fine ending was now completely upended. And the other group, I can truly only describe what I felt and heard as relief. They were relieved that she had stabbed him, which is very disturbing. And what kind of world have we set up that that is the reaction? Relief. Because to them and to us, how it felt that what she did in our production was better than the life that the Duke wanted from her. So it was a very interesting sort of shift and then shift back that occurred. There was a lot of really amazing sort of vocal moments. I think our first preview, someone, when he started staggering, yelled out full voice, "What is happening?" And then another performance that I saw, when the knife came out, a young man in the front row went, "Yes!" And I was like, oh my gosh. So it was very interesting. So, love it or hate it, just keep talking about it. I think no doubt about it. I think one thing we can say is this production definitely inspired discussion. And I'll take that as more than a Pyrrhic victory, because this is a problem worth discussing. And I'm so grateful for the engagement on this piece. The amount of people that reached out to me to question the choices of this production and then have an engagement with me was amazing. It's sort of everything that I want from theater, is for us to be able to talk about these things and to be challenged and enraged and be able to get in a room and talk about these difficult things. So adaptation in Shakespeare is necessary to keep these plays relevant and to show that when these ancient stories collide with modern audiences, the results can still be thrilling. Hundreds of years later, can still be thrilling. So I'll leave you with, we have time for questions, but also a couple of photos that we couldn't use in any of our promotional materials because they gave away the ending. So they're great photos that we can never use, so I thought I'd put them. Thank you very much.
volunteered for the
Charles McNulty did, yeah.
McNulty did. But and you talked about like make it real for like bringing it into the viewer's contemporary frame of reference. Make it say something about the life of the people that are actually witnessing the production. And the thing that keeps coming back to my mind, which hadn't happened yet when I saw it, and I guess when we all saw it, was this fellow who killed the CEO of the insurance company and the reaction.
I mean, that's what, yeah, it feels chillingly relevant for me to say.
And now it becomes chillingly relevant, and in that frame, I don't think this is about femininity or, the problem of women as it is the problem of people that are being crushed by power.
Wow.
Well, your quote, the measure is out of measure. I think it's the lack of agency, whether you're male, female, or whatever, that so many people feel. And I think that's the thing that immediately came to mind. The Duke could have been a healthcare executive.
Right.
Totally.
Wow.
Controlling everything, right?
Yeah.
And causing everything. And
and what's fascinating is that, so did anyone see the trial that we did earlier before the shows last year? So the trial was, Mariana was on trial for rape by fraud. And it was really fascinating. But what was so frustrating, the Duke was scot clean in the charges, even though it was his idea and sort of he put everything in motion. It's like he sort of had his hands off of it in a way, and very much he's behind the scenes pulling all the strings, making all the decisions, very much so. And I think you're right that when the power is corrupt, because we watch the play, we watch Isabella go through all the proper channels to try to get justice, actual justice served, and it doesn't work. Out of options is something that I put. So I think to say that she has a choice in any of this is a bit unrealistic.
But but it's almost, just a follow-up to that, it's almost as if you're reading Plato in the Republic, what is justice? The first person that stands up is Thrasymachus, and he says justice is what is in the interest of the stronger. And of course, Socrates demolishes it. But in real life,
I know. I mean, we hope, I hoped for a different ending for her. Like, this isn't the ending that I personally wanted for this character. It was what felt like was the inevitable conclusion.
Well, I think there's a lot of it that relates, gender, power, all of those things. The other thing that, it's been a long time since I'd seen it, of course, but seeing these clips again reminded me how, the church, not really a resource, the mother of the convent, not. And I realize that maybe some of that is because of sort of these, forgive me, but male roles that you folded in might have changed that. But, at the end of the day, while she sort of has agency, she's given it all away now, because now she's not going to be free to be a nun, she's going to be,
Well, I'll tell you, because it made me feel slightly more comforted, because that was Julia's original real disturbing look end of the play, is what happens to Isabella. And a friend of mine came to see first preview, and she was like, oh, I felt like having all the other female characters there, particularly Aeschylus and Francisca, the nun, being in such prominent positions and witnessing what she does, she's like, I felt like it was the answer to Angelo's Who Will Believe the Isabella, that now there are 6 witnesses that will say whatever they want. And I was like, whoa. And I hadn't thought about that, but I thought it was such an interesting interpretation of the end. That being said, even in that version, where to me, like, the best case scenario is that they're like, yeah, some dude came by and stabbed the Duke, and they all like, yes, we agree, and Aeschylus takes over and is ruling. Isabella, I think the best case for her is she goes to a convent and maybe doesn't talk to anyone for the rest of her life. I mean, I think she is wholly traumatized by this. Like, I think this is a very tragic ending for her. There's nothing about how it actually felt in reality. It's like, yeah, girl power.
It
No.
doesn't really feel like
Yeah.
Your plea for empathy. How many characters are we empathetic in this play?
I mean, for me, everyone.
That's the point. That's the
That's
point.
how I direct. I feel for everyone.
Okay, going back to Isabella though. The last thing that you said, I'm looking at her stabbing as her escape. Her escape from the other problems that she had. This is her escape, and whatever happens to her, it's freeing her.
I think that that's how a lot of people felt at the end was, because at the very least it is freeing her from the fate that she was heading towards, which was something she did not choose and that she did not want. There's nothing in the text for me that to support that that's what she wants at the end of the play. And I wish Shakespeare had written her some lines, but I don't think he could. I don't think that you could have someone publicly rejecting a monarch.
Is along with escape is not even the beginning of her as a prospective nun. Isn't that her escape also?
I think so. I think so. As far as like the limited choices that are offered, I absolutely think so. I think in our production, Heather and I spoke about that she is religious, she does have faith, but it's more of a choice to separate herself from the lawlessness of Vienna and to have a little space for herself. Like, you know, like Sorwana, you know, if anyone knows about Sorwana, you know, this like, she chose that life so that she could have agency and that she could have she didn't belong to somebody else. So I think that that's very much a part of it for sure. And back to your question of empathy, like I very much direct having empathy for everyone. So many of you have seen the production. Abel's Angelo is to me a much more sympathetic Angelo than most productions, because we treated it like, what if this was a guy who literally this is the first time that this has ever happened to him? And I love that, like, that second scene, for the first half of it, I feel like it's truly a man who's like fighting for his soul. He hasn't like started the scene being like, oh, which is so often how you see it played. But I don't think that negates the fact that like our production was intending, with all of the tact with the heartbeats, to put her at sort of the empathy center. And there was a moment in rehearsal where we were rehearsing one of those scenes and the heartbeats, and I was like, God, am I just like putting a hat on a hat here? Like, of course I feel what she's feeling. My own heart is going like this. But that, of course, is because of the life that I've led leading into me sitting in this theater. And not everyone feels that way. And in fact, you can hear in the recording, I think, the amount of laughter that's happening during that proposal. When that close-up hits of Isabella's face, we don't have that close-up when we're watching the play The Swan. I mean, we're close, but we're not that close. It's like, there is still like, that laughter is like, there's a lack of empathy of how devastating that moment is to her. So it's like, our tact was trying to force